"Hey, watch the bucket!" shouted the masked woman, trying to keep the gumdrops from scattering across the sidewalk. But it was already too late. The colorful wrappers rolled among the dry leaves as costumed kids ran back and forth, laughing loudly. The woman crouched down, tried to gather the candies with one hand while holding a bag full of party favors with the other. The little ones, dressed as pumpkins, skeletons, and even a dinosaur, crowded around her, bouncing with excitement. She was trying to keep things under control, but it was clear she needed help. Ethan approached silently, his makeshift white cape fluttering slightly in the chilly Halloween night breeze. He paused for a moment, observing. This noisy chaos, the smell of buttery popcorn drifting from the corner, the muffled sound of music coming from the park, was everything he had avoided for years. But something about the scene made him bend down. "Need a hand?" he asked, already crouching beside her. The woman looked up from behind a simple orange felt mask. Not much was visible beyond her eyes, brown, alert, and a quick, surprised smile. "A helpful ghost. That's a new one." She laughed, handing him a handful of candies she'd managed to rescue from the ground. "Sometimes ghosts have debts to settle," he replied, tossing the sweets back into the bucket. She laughed again. A light laugh, like someone who hadn't expected company but didn't mind having it. She stood up and adjusted the wool hood she wore over her simple costume. The cold wind danced along the sidewalks, lifting dry leaves that had piled near houses decorated with jack-o'-lanterns and fake cobwebs. Across the street, one house even had a skeleton sitting on the porch, holding a plastic cup. "I'm a volunteer here," the woman said, pointing to a small booth lit with orange string lights, where a line of kids with cups of hot chocolate stretched out. "We're collecting candy to donate to shelters tomorrow. It's kind of become a tradition." Ethan nodded, looking around. The street, usually quiet, was buzzing, families with their children going door to door, adults dressed as monsters or witches, chatting and laughing. It was the kind of thing he only ever saw through his apartment window. Seeing it up close gave him a strange feeling, almost human. "You seem a little out of place," she said, now holding the refilled bucket. "Is this your first time?" "First time wearing an old sheet as a costume, for sure," he replied with a crooked smile. She glanced at the white cape draped over his dress shirt and let out a short laugh. "I'd say you didn't put much effort in. I'd say I had too much boredom." He looked at her. "That's what brought me here, honestly. Thought watching people pretend to be monsters would be more fun than eating dinner alone. Again." She didn't reply, just offered him the other bag she was carrying. "Come on then, helpful ghosts are in short supply tonight." Ethan took the bag, surprised at how quickly he'd agreed. They walked together between the houses, helping kids pick out candy, handing out smiles and directions. Gradually the night filled with familiar sounds, the crinkle of plastic wrappers, a child's giggle upon spotting their favorite treat, the muffled thank you from behind toy vampire teeth. They chatted between houses. No names, no direct questions. Ethan noticed the woman avoided talking about herself, and he didn't push. It was as if the masked encounter created a kind of freedom, a chance to simply be who they were, with no past and no expectations. "Do you always take part in things like this?" he asked, as she helped a little girl whose cape had gotten stuck on a shoe's Velcro strap. "Whenever I can. Sometimes the simple things are what we need the most." She stood up, wiping her hand on her jeans. "I think keeping these traditions alive helps remind us we're still part of something bigger, even when everything feels way too small." Ethan looked at her, trying to understand how someone could say something like that so naturally. He, who spent most of his days surrounded by contracts, numbers, and meetings, felt a twinge of something he couldn't quite name. "Never thought about it that way," he admitted. "It's not the kind of thing you think about until you miss it." She looked at him for a moment, as if she could see past the white cloth. They kept walking, handing out the last of the candy. At some point, she stopped in front of a house with an over-the-top display, blinking lights, a giant spider on the roof. "This is my last stop," she said, placing the bucket on the ground. "Already?" "Yeah, I've got another event with the kids early tomorrow." She adjusted the mask on her face. "But thanks for the help, mysterious ghost." He smiled, not wanting the night to end so soon. "Can I know your name?" She hesitated for a second, then stepped back, already turning away. "Maybe at the next party." And with a wink, she vanished into the crowd, like she was part of the very mist drifting over the sidewalks. Ethan stood still for a moment, watching the flickering lights, the laughter fading, the sound of leaves brushing across the pavement. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't in a hurry to go home. Something about that night, that masked woman, had left a strange mark. A kind of warmth, hard to explain. As he began walking back, the crumpled sheet still draped over his shoulders, he thought about the one phrase that kept echoing in his mind. A helpful ghost? That's a new one. And it truly was. The apartment door closed with a muffled click, echoing through the spacious silence of the place. Ethan tossed his keys onto the marble kitchen counter and let the white cape fall to the living room floor, as if it weighed more than it should. He walked past the elegantly cold decor, the minimalist furniture, the polished floor reflecting the recessed lights, the perfectly aligned abstract paintings. Everything was in its proper place, as always, and yet everything felt off. He dropped onto the wide couch, arms stretched out to the sides. The makeshift costume, now crumpled, lay forgotten on the floor. He stared at the ceiling for a while, as if it might hold some kind of answer. That night, for the first time in a long while, he had heard real laughter. He had felt the brief, accidental touch of a hand, the warmth of a conversation free of hidden agendas, and the absurd lightness of not having to say who he was. The anonymity of the mask, the simplicity of carrying candy, the exchange of brief, meaningful words, all of it had left him with a kind of good restlessness. He stood up slowly and headed to the kitchen. Poured himself a glass of wine but stopped after the second sip. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling glass window. Outside, the city was already returning to its usual rhythm. Cars rushing by, neon signs blinking without much charm, the heavy sky promising rain. The street was nearly empty now, littered with confetti remnants and plastic bags caught on the sidewalk fences. The night before felt like a parallel world. Ethan swirled the wine in his glass. He thought about the masked woman. The way she organized everything with the kids, how she spoke about traditions with calm, how she smiled even amid the chaos. The memory of her laughter was still fresh, and there was something else, an odd feeling, almost familiar. He set the wine aside and walked to the bedroom, took off what remained of the costume and tossed the dirty clothes into the hamper. As he changed his shirt, he noticed something on his palm, a faint red stain, probably from some party decoration. He stared at it for a moment, as if it were a clue. Something kept echoing inside him. He showered, dressed in something comfortable, and sat on the edge of the bed. Picked up his phone. No urgent notifications, just a few messages from his assistant and a reminder about the Monday board meeting. But none of it seemed to matter. The image of the masked woman returned with force, as if he could still hear her voice joking with the kids. And then, out of nowhere, an old memory surfaced, sharp and sudden like a punch. He was at a college party, loud music, colorful lights, red cups in everyone's hands. The room was full of young people dancing, talking, laughing. He, much younger, overly confident, surrounded by fellow economics majors, was cracking some joke, laughing at something someone had said. In front of him stood a shy girl, brown hair in a messy bun, clutching a book tightly to her chest. Someone had invited her to the party, but she clearly didn't belong there. Ethan remembered the moment their eyes met, and he remembered bitterly the comment he made. "Let me guess, you came just to rack up extra credit for the professor? Or are you studying people's reactions to alcohol in real time?" Everyone laughed, including him, but the girl only nodded silently, her eyes trying to hide the shame. Instead of clapping back, she simply turned and left without saying a word. Ethan hadn't thought much about it afterward, just another moment among many. But now that memory unsettled him, not just because of what he'd said, but because there was something in her expression, something he had seen before, something that somehow matched the masked woman from the night before. His heart picked up slightly. He got up, went to the closet, grabbed a jacket and headed out. He had to clear his head. The sidewalk still held traces of the night before, but the mood was different now, colder, quieter. Ethan walked to the corner cafe, the one he visited on Sunday mornings, always ordering the same strong black coffee. As he approached the window, he stopped. There, sitting alone at a table inside, was her. No mask, hair in a loose bun, a simple grey wool sweater, the same brown eyes focused on the notebook in front of her. She was sipping coffee and writing, completely unaware of his presence. Ethan froze for a second. His body moved before his brain did. He pushed the door, making the bell ring, and stepped inside. She looked up. For a moment, everything stopped. He knew. There was no doubt anymore. It was her, the girl from college, the masked woman, the volunteer who made him laugh beneath a sheet. She recognized him too, but her face didn't show surprise, just a slight hardening of her expression, like she identified him, assessed him, and chose to keep her distance, all in 2 seconds. "Hi," Ethan said, his voice lower than he expected. "Hello," she replied, emotionless. He stepped closer, cautiously. "May I—" "It's a public place," she said, nodding toward the chair across from her without looking up. Ethan sat down slowly. She continued writing for a few more seconds before closing her notebook and looking him straight in the eye. The silence between them was thick, but not empty. It was full of something unspoken, something that existed even before that Halloween night. "I thought it might be you," she finally said. "Last night." She nodded. "Your voice gave it away, and the silence too." Ethan gave a strained smile. "You remember." "I remember a lot of things, Ethan Cole. Some are hard to forget, even when you want to." He nodded. It was more than clear that this conversation wouldn't be easy. "I wanted to thank you for last night, for letting me help." She crossed her arms. "You looked like you really needed it." "I did," he admitted, staring at the table, "more than I realized." The silence returned, this time more awkward. She picked up her mug, drank the last of her coffee, and set it gently on the saucer. "Nice to see you can still handle a bucket of candy. And nice to see you can command an army of monsters under 3 feet tall," he shot back, trying to ease the tension. She didn't laugh. "I run a community center. The kids come from all over the city. Sometimes events like that are the only thing they have all month." Ethan straightened in his chair. The connection was immediate. "Is that why you organized everything?" She shrugged. "Someone has to. And I don't wait for others to do what I can." Ethan studied her face, the resolve there, the steadiness in her voice. She wasn't the girl from college anymore. She was a woman who refused to be dismissed. He took a deep breath, unsure of what to say. It felt like every wrong word could send him right back to where he was trying to escape. "I should get going," she said, gathering her things. "Sophie!" he called, saying her name out loud for the first time, with the certainty of someone who finally recognized what he had lost. She paused, looked at him with something between surprise and exhaustion. "Take care, Ethan." And she walked out, leaving behind the scent of coffee and memories he could no longer ignore. "Hey, Sophie, right?" She turned her head, recognizing the voice before she even saw him. The morning wind tossed her loose hair, and the paper bag in her hand crinkled under the weight of fresh fruit. Her brown eyes met his with caution. "Ethan," she replied, not hiding the discomfort. They stood in front of the bread stand at the local market, where neighborhood residents picked up their daily essentials. The wooden shelves gave off the warm scent of fresh yeast and cinnamon. The space was small, cozy, with soft instrumental music playing in the background, a place where the community lingered, unhurried. Ethan held a package of cookies in one hand and a bottle of juice in the other, as if caught in the middle of a mundane errand, but the tension on his face betrayed that he had come prepared for this encounter. "Do you come here often?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I do," she replied, picking up a loaf of rye bread without looking away. "But if you're here to chat, I'm kind of in a rush." He let out a short laugh, more nervous than amused. "No, He paused, taking a breath. "I was nearby and saw you walk in." She raised an eyebrow, said nothing, just placed the bread in her bag and started walking toward the register. He followed beside her. "About the other night," he began. "It's over, Ethan. It was a night of costumes. You helped, I said thank you. End of story." "I don't think it's just that." She stopped, turning to him. They were a few feet from the checkout line, with two older ladies behind them chatting about recipes. "Listen, you had your life. I had mine. What was said in college, what you did or didn't do, that's not my problem anymore. I'm focused on other things now. Like the community center," he finished. Her expression shifted slightly. A muscle in her jaw tensed, as if that was something he wasn't supposed to know. "Who told you?" "A neighbor," he said honestly. "I asked about you. He mentioned you run the place, and that things have been tough over there." She scoffed with a skeptical smile, already walking again. Of course, everyone loves to talk about what they're not willing to fix. Ethan walked beside her, switching the bag from one arm to the other. "You don't have to be defensive." "I'm not," she shot back. "I just don't want you thinking you can show up out of nowhere and play the hero in my story, because you can't." "I don't want that," he said, now stopping on the sidewalk in front of her. "I just wanted to understand. I wanted to help." Sophie stopped too. The wind was stronger out here, sending leaves skimming across their feet. The city moved around them, indifferent. Cars passed, people hurried by, a child cried in their mother's arms at the corner. "Help, why? Guilt? Regret?" She looked straight at him. "Because if it's that, keep it to yourself." "I want to help because maybe I should have done it a long time ago, because maybe I'm trying to learn how to do things differently, and because last night, even without knowing who you were, I felt good around you." The silence between them lasted longer than any answer could have. Sophie looked at him for a moment that felt heavier than the scene could carry. Then, adjusting the bag on her arm, she simply said, "Good luck with that." And she walked away without looking back. Ethan stood there for a few seconds, taking it all in. Her reaction wasn't a surprise, but it still hurt. Later that same day, Ethan sat on his balcony, watching the buildings in the distance, a glass of water in hand, and his thoughts far off. Sophie's image still pulsed in his mind, the tone of her voice, the way she held her bags, the steady gaze that didn't waver. He opened his laptop and searched for the name of the community center. Project Roots. A simple site, barely updated. One tab for donations, another with old photos, kids playing, teens painting murals, seniors gathered for dance classes. All very modest, but full of life. He read every line of the description, learned that the center served families in the area with little access to cultural activities, mental health support, or even meals outside of school. Saw that it operated with minimal resources, relying on donations and volunteers. He closed the laptop, leaning his head against the back of the chair. The late afternoon sky was already darkening, and the city began to glow with artificial lights. The contrast was beautiful, but distant, much like the life he led. The next day, in the building's elevator, Ethan stepped in, already responding to emails on his phone, when the neighbor from Unit 502 joined him, an older man with a scruffy beard, always wearing a blue cap. "Saw you talking to Sophie at the market," he said bluntly. Ethan looked up, curious. "You know her well?" "Pretty well. My granddaughter's been going to her community center since she lost her dad. That place saved my family." The elevator reached the ground floor, and they walked out together. "She runs it alone. There are volunteers, sure, but she's the one carrying it on her back. Some months, they're short on money for the electricity bill, and she still finds a way." Ethan stopped right there, watching the man cross the street. That hit harder than he expected. Later, back at his apartment, he sat in front of his computer again. The donation form for the center was open. He paused for a moment. He could send a generous amount right now. It would be easy, quick, efficient. He typed in the amount, 5 digits. But something made him stop before clicking confirm. It was a voice, internal, uncomfortable, the same one that had kept him up at night for months. The same one that echoed Sophie's words, "Don't think you can show up out of nowhere and play the hero in my story." Yes, he wanted to help. But why? Was it truly just to help? Or was it another attempt to cleanse his own conscience, to feel useful in a way that didn't require time or effort? He closed the laptop without donating. He needed to think. He needed to do this right. The next morning, he took the same route to the market. She wasn't there, but he stopped in front of the neighborhood's bulletin board. In the bottom corner, a flyer taped to the board read, "Volunteers needed for Project Roots, painting, donation sorting, event support. All help welcome." Below, a phone number. Ethan jotted it down, stood there for a few seconds. Then he called, "Let me help you with that." The voice came from the entrance of the market, firm but cautious. Sophie looked up just as one of her paper bags began to give out at the bottom. She tried to steady the weight, but the apple on top rolled straight to the floor. Ethan bent down before she had a chance to react. "Still have a knack for showing up at the right moment, huh?" she said, gripping the bag tighter as he picked up the fruit and returned it to her carefully. "Let's just say fate's been putting me on the right corners lately," he replied, glancing up with a half-smile. The morning air smelled of fresh bread and mint. The damp sidewalks glistened under the weak sun, breaking through the clouds. The neighborhood market, small and always bustling on weekends, buzzed with voices, footsteps, and hurried conversations. Sophie studied Ethan for a moment. He looked different. Plain sneakers, a gray t-shirt, unshaven. Gone was the meticulously polished look he always carried. But still, Ethan. "I've got 2 more bags inside. Need to grab them before the hot milk leaks," she said, without much patience, already turning back in. Ethan followed without another word. While she gathered the remaining bags, he stood beside her, waiting. There was no room for small talk. But there wasn't hostility either, just a calculated distance. "I can carry those for you," he offered when she loaded her arms visibly full. "You gonna follow me home now?" she shot back, but without malice. "No, just as far as you'll let me." She considered it for a moment, then handed him 2 of the bags. "I live 4 blocks away. Don't say I didn't warn you." They walked side by side in silence for nearly a minute. Their footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, under trees with reddening leaves about to fall. Ethan looked around, as if seeing the neighborhood with new eyes. "I've lived 10 minutes from here and never walked these streets before," he commented after a while. "That says a lot about the kind of life you used to live," Sophie replied, not with sarcasm, just a fact. You giving me a chance to change that? I let you carry bags. Don't confuse that with redemption." He chuckled, accepting the boundary. 2 more corners down, Sophie stopped in front of a light blue gate. The low wall revealed a yard with old toys, a makeshift garden in the back, and a faded banner that read, "Roots Community Center." The building was simple, white-painted brick with green trim. Large windows let in as much light as possible. "This is where I spend most of my days," she said, nudging the gate open with her hip, "even on Sundays." Ethan stood still for a moment, taking in the place. "Can I come in?" She hesitated. "Just to the kitchen. I need to put these away." They entered. The sound of children laughing echoed from one of the rooms. Even on the weekend, a few volunteers were organizing supplies, and 2 teens played Uno at a table in the back. The space smelled like milk and coffee, finger paint and sweet bread, chaotic and welcoming. Sophie headed straight for the kitchen. Ethan followed, placing the bags on a makeshift wooden counter. "You run all this." "Not alone, but yes, I'm responsible for keeping it going." That explains a lot. She started putting groceries away efficiently, not looking at him. "Like what?" "Why you seem so comfortable on Halloween night, calm in the middle of the chaos. I only just realized that is your day-to-day." She shut the fridge door firmly. "When you spend years dealing with the absence of everything, you learn how to make a little feel like a lot and to make it work every day without stopping." Ethan leaned his hands on the counter. "Is that why you didn't want my help?" She turned, finally meeting his eyes. "Because help, Ethan, is different from showing up with a solution. You spent years not even knowing this place existed, and now suddenly you want to be part of it? Want to fix something you don't even know where you broke?" "I know I messed up," he said, not backing down, "and I'm not here to fix the past. I want to understand the present. I want to know how to do it differently." "Why?" "Because when we ran into each other, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. And it wasn't just about you, it was about me too. About looking someone in the eyes and being seen as a person, not a title or a bank account. About feeling like maybe I still have time to become someone better." She took a deep breath, looking out the window, where a few kids were now helping clean colorful paintbrushes. "I don't have room for doubt here. If I fail, people go hungry. If I get my hopes up, kids end up back on the street. So if you want to be here, it has to be for something real, not nostalgia, not guilt. Then tell me how." She walked to the door and stopped there without turning around. "Come tomorrow, 7 a.m., comfortable clothes, hard work." And then, before leaving, she added, "No questions." And she left, leaving Ethan alone in the kitchen, surrounded by empty bags, the scent of fresh coffee, and the certainty that that conversation had changed everything. He looked around, still feeling the warmth of the place, the sounds of kids, laughter, little arguments over toys. For the first time since inheriting his fortune, he felt like he was part of something that couldn't be bought. He smiled faintly. 7 a.m., comfortable clothes, no questions. "Did you see this? It's on the neighborhood site," said Patrick, the doorman of Ethan's building, holding out his phone with the screen facing him. Ethan stopped at the entrance and frowned. He was heading out, wearing a light jacket, earbuds still in. He removed one and stepped closer. The headline on the screen made his stomach drop. $1 million donation saves local community center. Ethan Cole revealed as anonymous benefactor behind the surprise. The article featured a photo of Sophie, smiling beside a group of kids. Below, a paragraph highlighted Ethan's name in bold, followed by a description of his fortune and the amount donated. Ethan didn't respond. He just stared at the phone, stunned. "The article went up last night. Been going around in the neighborhood group this morning. I figured you authorized it," Patrick added, eyeing him. "I didn't authorize anything." "Yeah, then someone's leaking your stuff." The doorman shrugged and returned to his desk. Still, at least it's helping the neighborhood, right? Ethan didn't answer. He stepped out of the building, his pace quick, the cold morning wind biting at his face. He had made the donation discreetly, through an intermediary foundation. No name, no publicity. The intention was simple: to help, really help, without applause, without making it look like he was trying to fix something. But now, as he approached the community center, Ethan felt something had shifted. The kids still ran around the yard like always, but the adults looked at him differently. Two volunteers whispered as he passed. An older woman offered a small smile and a soft, "Thank you." The events coordinator waved from a distance, as if she knew him from somewhere beyond that place. He climbed the entrance steps, crossed the hallway, and found Sophie in the small administrative room, folding papers at her desk. When she saw him, she stopped immediately. "You saw it?" was all she said. Ethan closed the door behind him. The room was cramped, filled with shelves overflowing with folders, kids' drawings on the walls, and an electric kettle perched on a chair. "I saw it this morning, and I swear on everything that matters to me, I didn't know they were going to publish that." Sophie crossed her arms, her gaze steady, as if holding back a wave of frustration. "I asked for discretion, Ethan." "So did I. I used a third party to make the donation, a foundation I trust." "Then why is your name in it?" "I don't know." He took a step closer. "But I'll find out." She took a deep breath, looking away for a second. Walked over to the window where a few kids were drawing in the courtyard. "Now everyone thinks you're the hero who showed up and fixed everything with money. And I look like the woman who only kept this place afloat because a millionaire had a crisis of conscience. That's not what this is." "No?" She turned again, her voice firmer. "Because that's exactly what it looks like. The phone hasn't stopped ringing since last night. Reporters, locals wanting to meet the benefactor, city council members scheduling photo ops. You turned this place into a circus." Ethan swallowed hard. "I just wanted to help. And I just wanted dignity." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Sophie rubbed her forehead, trying to keep her anger from boiling over. "I let you help as a volunteer. I saw you coming in early, painting walls, building shelves, hauling boxes. I thought maybe you were actually trying to understand what this place means." "I am," he said, barely above a whisper. "Then why do this? Why use the money?" "Because I saw the roof was about to cave in, that the power system was failing, that the pantry food would only last till the end of the month, because I realized physical work helps, but it doesn't solve everything." "You think I don't know that?" she said, eyes shining. "You think I don't know where every crack is, every exposed wire? The difference is, I've carried that weight for years without a single extra cent, and I've never needed a headline to keep going." Ethan stepped closer, locking eyes with her. "I didn't ask for that headline. I didn't want the credit. I wanted the center to stay open. I wanted those kids to have a place to play, to learn, to eat. And yes, I wanted to show you I've changed. But I understand now. This isn't about me." Sophie studied him for several seconds, searching for something fake in his words. She didn't find it, but she didn't find comfort either. "Then prove it." "How?" "Stop trying to fix things your way. Stop thinking you can buy trust. If you want to be here, do it the right way, quietly, consistently. I will, as long as it takes." She nodded slowly. "Good. Let's see how far that promise goes." Ethan took a deep breath, stepped back, and left the room, leaving the door open behind him. The hallway was filled with voices, children passing by with toys, a volunteer handing out paintbrushes. The world inside the community center kept turning, but inside him, something had stopped. He felt exposed, frustrated, misunderstood, and more defeated than he'd ever felt. Not even million-dollar losses or boardroom crises had hit like this. Because here, It didn't matter how much money he had, how many zeros he could add to a transfer. What mattered was what he did when no one was watching, and for the first time, he knew exactly where to start. He would stay, not out of guilt, not out of pride, but because finally he was ready to relearn how to be useful, with his hands, with his time, with his heart. "Careful with that can, it's leaking," shouted Andre, one of the center's oldest volunteers. Wearing a paint-stained old shirt, Ethan tightened the lid and lifted the can more carefully, carrying it to the corner of the room where they were organizing painting supplies. The sharp smell of varnish mixed with dust hung thick in the air. An old fan spun lazily overhead, pushing the heat from one side to the other. It was Monday, the start of another week at the community center, and Ethan had been there since early morning. No meetings, no suit, no driver. Just a ladder, a can of paint, and sweat trickling down the back of his neck. Since the article leak, he'd returned every day, quietly. He arrived before the others, wore the same worn jeans, and took on the jobs no one wanted. He painted walls, sanded doors, cleaned old toys. No cameras, no posts, no explanations. Sophie, on the other hand, kept her distance. She saw him, he knew that. From somewhere in the center, she was always aware of him. Sometimes she pretended not to be. Other times their eyes met for a brief second before she looked away. But she didn't stop him from coming, and that in itself was something. On Wednesday, while reorganizing shelves in the storage room, Ethan heard laughter from the hallway. Kids running, slamming doors, calling to their friends. It was workshop break time. He glanced out the window and saw Sophie sitting with 3 teenagers, showing them how to sew buttons onto cloth dolls. The sunlight touched the side of her face. Her hair was tied up with a pen, her shirt marked with chalk, a quiet smile on her face as she corrected a crooked stitch. No camera could ever capture that real, unintentional sweetness. Ethan found himself smiling and went back to work. On Friday, the events coordinator approached him with a roll of papers in hand. "Ethan, can you help set up the booth for tomorrow's market?" "Of course. Where's it going?" "Out back. The canopy's torn, but if we stretch it, it should hold up against the wind." He spent all of Saturday putting together the improvised neighborhood fair booth, stapled fabric to the corners, helped kids hang up paper decorations, even brought a portable speaker from home. At the end of the day, feet dusty and arms tired, he sat on the front steps to catch his breath. Sophie appeared behind him, carrying a box of donations. "It looks good." He turned toward her. She meant the canopy. "It'll still need support on the sides. Wind's supposed to pick up tomorrow. I set aside some stakes. I'll get here early." She nodded, setting the box down beside him. The kids liked the music. The playlist was their idea. I just helped with the speaker. Sophie stood for a few seconds, watching the cleanup around them. The last volunteers washed brushes, stacked tables, swept the floor. "You know," she said, finally sitting beside him on the step, "when you showed up in that ridiculous ghost costume, I never imagined this would happen." "Me neither," he replied honestly. "I just didn't want to spend that night alone." She laughed, soft, almost silent. "Do you still feel alone?" He thought for a moment. "Not when I'm here." The silence between them settled differently this time. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like a pause that belonged. Sophie stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be busy." "I'll be here, before sunrise." She didn't respond, just picked up the donation box and went back inside. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm stayed the same. Ethan kept arriving early, swept the outdoor areas, cleaned windows, helped at the Saturday community breakfasts. It was like he had finally found a purpose he'd been pretending not to need for years. A purpose money couldn't buy. On some mornings, Sophie would greet him with a quick nod. On others, she left handwritten notes with specific tasks. organize reading room, fix kitchen shelf, sort kids' clothes by size. He completed everyone without question. The distance between them was no longer made of distrust. It was made of caution, of respect. But slowly the tension began to shift. One Tuesday afternoon, while he was repainting the back wall, she appeared with 2 cups of orange juice and sat down next to the paint bucket. "You can take a break," she said, handing him a cup. He took it, surprised. "Thanks." She stayed there for a few minutes. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. The following Friday, he saw her smile at a boy who proudly showed her a pencil sketch. When Ethan walked by, she didn't look away. In fact, she held up the drawing to show him. "His name's Lucas. He's starting the tutoring program next week. He's excited." Ethan looked at the drawing. It was simple, full of crooked lines, but with a big, colorful sun in the corner. Below it, 2 stick figures, one with long hair, the other wearing a cap. "Is that supposed to be me?" "I think so," she said with a small smile. "He gave me too much hair." She laughed. It was the first open laugh he'd heard from her since Halloween night. The following week, after helping organize a small parents' event at the center, Ethan stayed later than usual. It was already dark. The building was quiet, only the light from the back room still on. Sophie was still there. He stopped at the door and knocked lightly. "Can I come in?" She looked up from the report she was typing. "You can." Ethan stepped inside, standing awkwardly. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For letting me stay, for not kicking me out, even after everything." She closed the laptop and crossed her arms over the desk. "You stayed on your own. I just didn't stop you." "But you could have." "I could have," she said honestly, "but I saw you hauling heavy boxes, crouched on the floor, fixing broken toys, saying good morning to the kids by name, cleaning bathrooms without complaining. I didn't think anyone was watching. I always watch, especially the people I don't trust." Ethan nodded, understanding more than she was saying. "You still don't trust me?" She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the empty yard. "I trust the ones who show up every day, who stay when the spotlight's gone, who understand that helping isn't about being seen, but about not giving up." She turned back to him, her eyes softer now. "And you're still here." Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to. That night, as he left the center and locked the front gate behind him, he felt something different in his chest, something quiet but solid. Like he was finally building something that mattered. And this time, it had nothing to do with money. The deafening crash was followed by an eerie silence. "What was that?" a volunteer shouted, running toward the back door. Ethan was in the reading room sorting children's books into piles when he heard the impact. He dropped everything and rushed down the hallway, passing 3 frightened kids running in the opposite direction. "Stay here," he instructed firmly, motioning for them to stay close to the wall. Out in the courtyard, a group had already gathered around the old workshop building, used for classes and recreation. Part of the roof had collapsed. The wooden structure sagged dangerously, broken tiles scattered across the floor, and a gaping hole now exposed the inside to the darkening sky. Sophie stood there, breathless, clipboard in hand, tension etched across her face. "Is everyone okay?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. "Yeah. No one was inside," she replied, scanning the area again to be sure. "But if someone had been—" She didn't finish the sentence. A shard of tile fell and shattered on the ground like glass. The sky, already overcast, began to darken rapidly. The first drops of the coming storm fell like a warning. "We have to get everything out of there," Sophie said, already stepping inside to start removing supplies. "Before it all gets soaked." Ethan ran after her. The forecast called for strong winds. "It's dangerous in there. And it's even more dangerous to leave everything and lose half the kids' materials." She pointed to boxes of paint, brushes, colored paper, wooden toys, and basic equipment used for activities. Without hesitation, Ethan followed her in. 3 other volunteers joined them. They began hauling out boxes, rolls of paper, baskets of educational supplies, stools, and shelves. The wind picked up fast, sending leaves and dust swirling across the courtyard. Lightning slashed across the sky, thunder rumbling like a warning from the ground up. The urgency grew. Inside the workshop, a bookshelf groaned, threatening to topple. "Quick! This one's unstable!" Ethan yelled, holding the side of the shelf while another volunteer grabbed the last items. "There's moisture creeping up the walls. The whole roof is compromised," another said. Outside, Sophie directed what was being brought out, storing items under a makeshift canopy while coordinating the younger volunteers to bring the children into the main hall. Then the rain came down, heavy, pounding, slanted by the wind. Ethan dashed out of the workshop, soaked and dirty, carrying a box of toys in his arms. His sneakers were drenched, his shirt clung to his skin, hair plastered to his forehead. But he didn't stop. He went back, ran again, hauled another box, helped tie down a tarp, climbed a ladder to reinforce the plastic with tape. "Ethan!" Sophie shouted, rushing toward him, her hood pulled low over her face. "That's enough! You're going to get hurt!" He was trying to tie one corner of the tarp to a hook high up on the wall. "Just this part left. If this side gives, the water will flood the art room." She stared at him for a second. He was covered in mud, shaking from the cold, but his eyes were steady, determined. So she didn't argue. She climbed up on the nearby chair and grabbed the tarp with him. Together, they tied the plastic down in silence, beneath heavy rain and the low rumble of thunder. When they finally stepped down, their clothes were drenched, their hands red from the cold, their eyes tired but in sync. They entered the main hallway, where other volunteers handed them makeshift towels and exchanged worried glances. "It's all more secure now," Ethan said. "But that structure needs a full rebuild, and fast." Sophie nodded, wiping rain from her forehead. Her breathing was heavy, her eyes still scanning for risks. "Thank you for staying," she said without looking at him. "I told you I would, whenever you need me." She hesitated, then finally met his gaze. "You could have left. No one would have blamed you, not in this storm. You had a meeting today, didn't you?" He shrugged, trying to downplay it. "I did, but it wasn't more important than this." She frowned. "With who?" "Investors. New project. Big numbers. And you cancelled. It's not like I can't reschedule, but rebuilding a roof after it collapses, that's not something you can postpone." She smiled. Just a small one, but full of meaning. For the first time, he saw something shift. A crack in the wall. A signal. Hours later, after the storm had passed and the sky began to clear, Ethan was still in the yard, sweeping up broken tiles and clearing mud from the workshop's edge. Sophie returned with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one without a word. They sat on 2 wet crates, watching water trickle from clogged gutters. "When you first showed up here, I figured you were just another guy trying to ease his guilt," she said, staring out at the horizon. "I thought so too," he replied. She looked at him, surprised by the honesty. "But I stayed, because even when everything felt wrong, being here made sense. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something real." "And you were," she said firmly. "You are." They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the last drops fall from the eaves. "There's still a lot to do," she said, glancing up at the damaged roof. "And I'm here for it." She nodded, then took a sip of the now lukewarm coffee and extended her hand. "Welcome to the team, Ethan Cole." He shook her hand firmly, feeling more weight in that gesture than in any contract he'd ever signed. There, between the mud, exhaustion, and the scent of wet wood, something between them finally aligned. Not in words, but in actions, in choices, and in the shared silence of 2 people who had finally figured out what truly mattered. "Ethan, come see this!" A child's voice echoed from the main courtyard, blending with ambient music, laughter, and hurried footsteps. Ethan smiled even before turning around. It was Lucas, now wearing a pirate hat and holding a toy sword, pointing excitedly at the top of the candy booth that had just been set up. Ethan walked through the revitalized community center with a look of quiet disbelief. The freshly painted walls were covered in drawings made by the kids. The floors shone, and paper lanterns swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. The booths were scattered across the space, each decorated with a different theme. Monsters, witches, characters from children's movies. Balloons and ribbons were everywhere. And laughter, so much laughter. It was Halloween again. 1 year since the night he wore a wrinkled bedsheet just to avoid being alone. 1 year since he met a masked woman and began shedding the layers of his life until only the essentials remained. And now, here he was. In dark jeans, dirt-smudged sneakers, a plain black t-shirt, no mask, no armor. Little by little, families began arriving, kids in costume, parents chatting, volunteers handing out hot chocolate. The event, organized by Sophie and the center's team, had become a tradition, and this year it was bigger, brighter, more alive. "Hey, you forgot this!" A younger volunteer handed him a simple cardboard name tag with Ethan written in marker and a small pumpkin drawn beside it. He clipped it to his shirt and kept walking. He passed by André, the same volunteer who'd helped him haul paint in the storm months ago. Now, André was running the face painting station. 2 girls waited patiently to become white kittens. "Look who's going without a mask this year," André said with a grin. "Figured a year later I could risk going without the disguise." "You're part of the furniture now. If you disappeared, we'd notice." Ethan smiled and kept walking. Near the main entrance, he saw Sophie. She stood beside a table with goodie bags, talking to 2 parents and jotting notes on a clipboard. She wore a purple top, dark jeans, and a headband with little cat ears. Her hair was down, resting on her shoulders, and her face, calm and glowing, seemed even warmer under the soft orange glow of the paper lanterns. She finished the conversation, glanced around, and saw him. Her smile came slowly, as if confirming something she already suspected. "No mask this year?" she asked, walking up to him. "Didn't feel like I needed to hide anymore." "I don't think you do." She studied him for a moment. "Everything ready?" "Everything's running. Lights, candy, even the music. The kids have officially taken over." "As it should be." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a white envelope, handed it to her. "This is for today," he said simply. She opened it on the spot, pulling out a printed letter with the center's logo at the top. It was a formal donation letter, but unlike previous ones, it had a collective signature at the bottom. The amount wasn't extravagant, but what stood out was the message written below: "In the name of the community, for all the days we've shared, to keep going." Sophie read it, then looked at him. "You didn't want to sign it. It's not my name that matters here." She tucked the paper away carefully, as if it were more valuable than any check. "Ghost or not, I think you've changed." Ethan stepped a little closer. The sound of kids' music blended with distant giggles. Wind scattered dry leaves across the ground. Children ran by with candy buckets, forcing adults to step aside every other minute. "I have," he said. "And not because of what I've done, but because of what I've learned here." "And what's that?" "That it's not about what we have. It's about what we share. Time, care, even silence." Sophie looked at him for a few moments. Then she held out her hand. He took it. They said nothing else. They just stood there, side by side, watching the children run through the renewed community center. The inner courtyard was full of color, lights, and sound. A kid in a dinosaur costume tripped, fell, got up, and kept running, laughing. A dad tried to negotiate a candy trade with his stubborn son. 2 teenagers danced dramatically near the popcorn stand. Life in its simplest and most real form was all there. And Ethan Cole, the man who once had everything, now had something he never knew he needed. He was home.
What it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.